Welcome to Powerbuilding, Fund the Future. Brought to you by New Media Ventures, this show dives deep into the transformative work of our founders, partners, and fellow ecosystem leaders who are actively dismantling systemic inequities and building pathways to collective liberation. I'm your host, Abigail Young, Investment Associate at New Media Ventures. For this season, I'm joined by my co-host, Callie Chamberlain, our 2024 Entrepreneur in Residence. For today's episode, we're talking all about reparations, land back, and land justice, and what that means for our country. For this conversation, we're excited to welcome Allie Young and Brea Baker.
We're going to have a great conversation about a lot of different things. But before we dive in, I would love for both of you to introduce yourselves to the audience. So, Brea, maybe we start with you.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here, y'all. I am Brea Baker, she, her pronouns. I am a Black writer, author, organizer, and I wrote a book called Rooted, The American Legacy of Land Theft and the Modern Movement for Black Land Ownership, which I'm excited to dig into and how that informed how I approach this conversation. But before all of that, I am a New Yorker by way of the South. And I'm now living back in the South again. And my connection to the Deep South and most Black Americans' connection to the Deep South is of deep interest to me. So I'm excited to get into it.
Amazing. Hey, Allie, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Allie Redhorse Young. I am the founder and director of Protect the Sacred, which is a Native youth-led organization or a Native woman-led organization. And we focus on Native youth leadership development, particularly in civic engagement, grassroots organizing, storytelling. And we also create space for our allies to come in and learn about how to work with the Native American community. No one-offs, when there's a hot topic coming into our communities, we really want to build intentional relationships and collaboration with these allies. And then I'm also a writer. I've written a bunch of op-eds on different topical issues regarding the Native American community, from reproductive justice for Native women to articles about missing and murdered Indigenous women in that movement, and then also just uplifting Native women in general.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how each of you got into the work that you're doing now.
Well, so Allie, you and I also met very early at least in my community organizing journey. We were both assistants at larger nonprofits led by Indigenous women, Chicana women on my end, and Harry Belafonte as well. So just like getting to learn from these greats and intergenerational spaces have definitely shaped how I enter this. I just think that there's so many misconceptions that are shaped by ignorance, and not all of it is willful. Like I think that word gets thrown out as if people want to be ignorant, but I genuinely believe we're overstimulated at times and trying to do our best and not always knowing exactly where to go. And I think it's beautiful to learn from people who have been doing it before social media, how to pull on people's attention span and keep it where it should be. And so that has just generally been part of my inception story. But as far as how I came to care about community organizing and storytelling in the context of land was when my grandfather died. And land ownership was not ever really a part of my main activism. I was mostly working around the criminal legal system. But when my grandfather died and on his deathbed was essentially telling us, like, don't sell the land. It means so much to him. It just really helped me to fully realize what it means to a Black elder in this country to have finally been able to hold a piece of something and to know that it could be lost in the span of a generation or two. And that's often the case, that Black people owned more land in 1910, less than a century out from slavery, than we do now in 2024.
Wow.
And that, to me, in a country where Black people were forced to work this land, is a supreme injustice, to say the absolute least. Let alone that land was taken through very violent methods. And so when we talk about racial wealth gaps, and I wasn't really thinking of that through the context of people like my grandfather. I didn't see him as an activist, and I didn't see what happens in the South around Black land ownership as activism until he passed away. And it being a baton pass. And again, going back to that intergenerational piece, like I wanted so badly for him to feel like his work was not in vain and to know that we cared enough to keep it going and that we saw the glimmer in his eyes when he looked at an open field and that we felt it too. Like I wanted him to to feel that from the other side. And so that became very important personally and professionally. I got married on that land, which I don't think I would have done prior to him passing, but it felt important to me that we continue to make positive memories on it and that it be this heirloom that we want to maintain and protect, not just as a commodity to trade and invest and all of those things, but actually like, hey, this piece of acreage has intrinsic value, and that value is something that I know as a sixth generation Black landowner, that my grandfather knew, that his grandparents knew, like that this is something that generations of Black people have been teaching one another. And I want to be another stepping tool. And so that's kind of where I jumped into more storytelling around this, supporting more nonprofits who were championing Black land ownership and what it means for reparations to include some version of a return to land. I'm curious, Allie, about your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I feel similar, especially that piece around storytelling, which is a big part of the work that I do now. But just to backtrack a little bit, I think I really started this journey post college. I was always very interested in storytelling and utilizing that as a tool to really fight against the erasure of Native Americans in this country, and really to highlight and amplify the stories from us, by us, and that come from community. And that started, well, in college, but then post college, 2014, 2015, I launched a art and media festival in the Four Corners region. So Four Corners, like New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado. That was called Survival of the First Voices Art and Media Festival, because I just wanted to create a space. I co-founded it with someone I went to middle school with, and I really wanted to create a space for young people to realize that if they have interest and passion around storytelling, that they could actually make a career out of it. And so I wanted to bring together Native artists who were doing this as a career, who were writing and directing films, and who are fashion designers, creating music. Because when I was growing up, I didn't really know that there were those kind of role models. Like, I didn't know there were like Native hip hop artists. And I knew about smoke signals, and that was probably the extent of it. But that's where my community organizing began, and it was really for the youth. And we held that for a couple of years, and then I decided to move to LA. And when I was living in LA, working in Hollywood, that's when Standing Rock happened, 16. And so I actually took time off, and I was working in this Nickelodeon show on the Paramount studio lot. And there were two other natives that were in the production office, and I really felt like at that time we were like the one space in Hollywood that had that many natives working on a show. And so we all knew what was happening with Standing Rock, and one of my colleagues, who's also Diné Navajo, from the Navajo Nation, we decided to take time off and drive out to Standing Rock, and that was around Labor Day. I visited Standing Rock twice and was a part of like the actions that were taking place there. And so for those who don't know, Standing Rock was really a movement that people from around the world joined. And it was the first time that I saw Native Americans standing up in this really incredible way in modern history to fight for our land. And what was happening at that time, in North Dakota, was the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. They were fighting against the Keystone XL pipeline, or sorry, the Dakota Access Pipeline. So it was the No DAPL movement that would go right through their reservation and really desecrate, a lot of their burial grounds and, just sacred places to these people, to this tribe. So we all came together, intertribal wanted to stand together, and then people from around the world were joining us. And then from that point on, I came back and realized, I do have this passion for storytelling and working in Hollywood, but I really felt this calling to reconnect with the stories of not only my people, but also people from other tribes across the country. And I realized that I didn't know a lot of their stories. And so I took a position at Native Americans in Philanthropy, where I was able to travel to a lot of these different communities across the country, tribal communities, and learn their stories. And I do think it made me a stronger storyteller. And yeah, and then that kind of led me to harness, where I came back to sort of like Hollywood meets social justice, and then that's when I launched Protect the Sacred. So that's been my journey, and with the storytelling piece, I've written, scripts that I have that talk about our relationship to the land, even in the work that I do at Protect the Sacred and civic engagement. And Ride to the Polls is our most popular program, where we ride on horseback to polling locations. That is even rooted in our stories about our relationship to the land, to Mother Earth. So I'm excited to dig deeper into this conversation, but that's my journey.
Wow. I mean, I had chills when both of you were talking. It's clear that both of you are writers and storytellers, and just the way you come to this work and the ancestral lineage, the connection that you feel to that and show up with, it's palpable. So thank you for that just introduction, level setting. As we think about land justice and reparations, which both of you kind of touched on, can you just help us understand what those words mean? What are we talking about when we say land justice and reparations?
Yeah. Well, for me, when we're saying land justice, I think that is justice for the land itself and the people on it, the people who have stewarded that land. That's to me the umbrella term that includes policies like land back and reparations, but it wouldn't be exclusive to that. I think any sort of climate justice work, renewable energy work, could be a form of land justice as long as it is also considering the impact to land stewards. And I think that that's something that people miss it. Sometimes they'll advocate so hard for the planet that they forget the people who live on it and depend on it, and that they are also a part of the equation. As far as reparations is a policy that kind of has some overlap, like a Venn diagram almost. And reparations is a like multi-pronged approach to addressing the legacy of slavery. And that includes ideas like baby bonds, that includes ideas like extra funding for HBCUs, or there's a lot of different ideas that could fall within it, and a lot of different approaches people have. But land reparations is one of the original ways that the word was used. Literally during the end of the Civil War was when the Union generals were going into the South, emancipating Black people and telling them that the state that had just freed them was going to commit to their freedom by giving them 40 acres and a mule. And that was supposed to be reparation, or like repair, for the harm of having been enslaved for however long those people had been enslaved for. These were like not descendants of, these were enslaved people who were now being freed. And that never really happened for Black people, but the idea planted a seed. And it was just sort of like, well, you can't free me, but I can't participate in this economy. And at the time, the economy is only an agricultural one. And so if I don't have a piece of land, I am very dependent on the same white people who were just treating me like property to let me in. And the fact that some Black people did find a way in is like miraculous, but is in no way because of anything that the federal government did. And so that ownership and that like burden still falls on the federal government to do something for those who never got any repair for having been enslaved, and for the ways that not addressing it has like compounded.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add is, from the Native American perspective, is that, we have this unique relationship with the federal government. Each federally recognized tribe has these treaty rights with the federal government. And through that, we expect certain things like, land justice. And because, all of these tribal communities were put on a piece of land called a reservation, and we have rights to that land, but it's still federal land if you think about it. And so that's why we stand up against things like, when these, like when resource extraction is happening, we feel that we do have this right to protect the lands that we were guaranteed through these treaties. But also, I think digging even deeper, like culturally, for Native Americans, I think for us, the land back movement, yeah, it's about, giving us our land back. It's about saying, don't acknowledge that you're occupying this land that was, originally the ancestral homelands of this tribe. Think about how you can, return that land, restore that land, to its original owners. And I think for Native American people, what we're really trying to get at is for our communities is to really restore this. I mentioned it earlier, this like relationship that we have with Mother Earth through our creation stories. And, that's all ancestral, indigenous ancestral knowledge that has been really swept under the rug on purpose. And it's all this knowledge that I think had it not been had the federal government not intentionally tried to erase that knowledge, I think we would be in a much better place with the climate and with the planet overall as a society. And so that's really what land back and land justice for us means, is really restoring, at the heart of it, that relationship that we have to Mother Earth, because we believe that Mother Earth and all of the inhabitants of Mother Earth are all, living being, and we're all in relationship to one another. We're related to, the four-legged, to the winged, to all of us as a community. We're all related, and that's what we're really trying to restore.
I
That's
love
really
what you said just now
beautiful.
too, because I think that that also speaks to how land back and reparations would serve non-Black and non-Indigenous people. Is that like right now, especially Americans live in a society where they are so disconnected from the world around us, the world being like the natural environment, how our food makes it to our plate, makes it to our grocery store, let alone to our plate. Like, I just think that we don't know what our native species, what are species that were brought in, what grows in season versus what we're expecting to get all year round, even though it's not in season. And I think those are things that we should all be concerned about. And I do think the COVID-19 pandemic was the first time I saw larger American society say, whoa, what is the state of our food system? And it's one of those things that you just like hope and trust will always be there. And then when it's not, you start to panic, like, could I grow my own food tomorrow if I had to? Do I know enough about the natural environment around me to forage if I needed to? Like, what would happen if grocery store shelves were empty for weeks? Would a lot of people would go hungry because we are so disconnected? And I think a really successful project would put land in the hands first of Indigenous and Black people. But then by nature, I think it would just transform all of our relationship to land. It would make all of us stop and smell the roses a bit more in a literal and in a figurative sense, and make us a lot more invested in learning from the land. So I think that's something that we see in little moments here and there. People understanding, wow, water really is life. People understand, wow, like the air quality is not something I could take for granted. But when you put all of that together, that is the undergirdings of the land justice movement.
I'm curious. I'm sure, like, as leaders in these movements, you've encountered like a lot of misconceptions about land back, about land justice, about reparations, and I'm curious if you guys want to speak to what some of those are, especially when it comes to this seemingly finite pie and how people are trying to or pit communities against each other in that.
Allie, I'm curious what you're hearing. I think were already alluding to the fact that people even look at reservations, which is a form of violence, as like what land. I don't know. I've heard that narrative that like reservations is a form of the land. How much land do they want back, and are they going to just kick out people out of their homes, and how much more will there be? And it's like anything less than all is still like very gracious. So I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that that question always comes up. Well, how much land do they want back? Do they want They're saying that the entire U.S. was theirs. Do they want the entire? And it's like, sure, yeah.
Yeah, right?
But realistically, we first of all, give us full autonomy over, I always, when I talk about tribal sovereignty, I always use air quotes around sovereignty, because I don't think we're truly sovereign as sovereign nations, tribal sovereign nations. Otherwise we wouldn't have this like obligation and treaty with the government. I think we would really truly have our own so in the Navajo Nation, we have our own Navajo Nation government. We have like an office of the president and vice president, like their administration, tribal council members, but they have to work with the BIA at the Department of the Interior, that would not exist if we were truly sovereign. Like, just let us, govern our own nations and have full autonomy, like, over our land and decisions around, our land and our water rights, etc. But yeah, I think that's a huge misconception, and I think what we're trying, obviously, that's realistically is not going to happen. We're not going to get the entire United States back, but I think there are like little steps, especially when it comes to things like, some of our sacred sites that are often these national parks. I think those are things that should be entrusted to these tribal nations and that we should really oversee. But yeah, I mean, I'll just leave it there.
I also think that's something that I come up against specifically around like Black folks is they'll use people like an Oprah Winfrey, a Michael Jordan as reasons why, like, you don't need reparations. See, there's Black billionaires, there's a Black president, there's been this. And I think seeing a few Black faces in some positions of power gets conflated with an overhaul. But again, the fact that Black people own less land now than we did 100 years ago, racial wealth gaps have only widened in that time as well. Most of the key markers of like quality of life, we're on the short end of that stick. So when we look at our criminal legal system, police brutality, like these are offsprings of a system that says that Black people don't really deserve to be treated like full citizens and are really here to be a labor force for this country. And that's why that no matter where you put Black people, whether it's in an asylum or a jail or a prison or a plantation, that there is some level of labor connected to us and our lack of freedom. So we have to have some sort of autonomy over not only our bodies, but our ability to earn a living. And like the labor is so tied to the conversation we're having over here too. So I think that, yeah, I could go on and on about that for days, but I do think that the idea that any one successful Black person is proof that reparations is not needed comes from a gross misunderstanding of American history and what any Black person has had to survive to get anything. Even that is like a fraction of what they maybe could have had if they'd had a fair shot at life.
Yeah. I love this reframing and the expansion that's happening and how you both are talking about this work. And I wonder if you could just help us locate a little bit more too in this conversation. Like, where do you feel like we've come as a society and grappling with these topics? And then where do you hope to see our conversation go in the future?
I can start because I was just going to add another misconception about our tribal communities and reservations in this country. I feel that sometimes we hear, why do they want more land when you go on a reservation and it's like a third world country? Like, they don't even take care of their land. And that is a gross misconception because it's the reason that you come to a reservation and there's very poor infrastructure. And also, I always, if you come to the Navajo Nation and you visit some of like the more populated communities in the reservation, I call it the junk food capital of the world. And it really is. And that is because of this system and, again, those treaties and this relationship that we have with the government. We are limited in our own reservations to even build our own businesses. That has to go through like a million like hoops for a Native person to establish a business on our own reservation. We've been restricted by all of this red tape from the federal government. And so, but it's so easy for McDonald's to come and, build a McDonald's and a Taco Bell and all these like fast food chains are built on our reservations. And that's what you find. It's a complete food desert on our reservations. And so, yeah, I think, unfortunately, to your next question, how far we've come, for the Native American community in our reservations, we haven't come very far, and I think there's a lot of work to still be done to even give like our communities and our youth and the next generations a fighting chance, because we should be in a place where we're able to, have our own people open up restaurants that can sell, healthier foods for our people, to get back to our traditional foods that are, corn, the mutton is a staple. So sheep, Things like that. I feel like we definitely had a healthier way of living as Indigenous peoples before, we were put on these reservations. And so, yeah, I mean, just the fact that people still think that, the fact that people, I've lived in places like Los Angeles where I've been in an Uber and my Uber driver says, "Oh, I've never met a Native American before. And I've only seen you all in the Westerns and the Hollywood movies." And they think that we still live in these teepees on our reservations. And that is just not the case, especially for my tribe, Navajo tribe, where we didn't have teepees. We have what we call a hogan. But there's a lot of education that still needs to be, restored. And you're thinking about critical race theory and how that's threatened, going forward. But those are all the things that those are all the reasons that there are these gross misconceptions that about our communities.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said everything you said. And I do think the erasure is something that really, the erasure of Indigenous people in our racial justice conversations nationally is definitely something that we've all got to take more accountability for. I think it's also what leads to a lot of the tension in between conversations around land back and reparations is the idea that Black people are hyper visible, even though it has not really translated to any like substantive systemic change for the community. There's like moments here and moments there and a lot of symbolism, but like the average Black American is still not able to access that. But the hypervisibility, I think, has led to this conception that like I've heard, at least when I'm having conversations about Black and Indigenous solidarity, like, can Black people give us some more space to be seen and be heard? And then I think on the flip side, I think then it becomes that like for Black people who have a lot of misconceptions and are seeing indigeneity as this like relic of the past as opposed to a contemporary community to engage with, then I think that also breeds the like, wait, I didn't even know there were Indigenous Americans. And then what I do know is a gross mischaracterization or caricature altogether. Like what I do see is only mascots or, activism here. Like if there's not space for us to come together and make the misconceptions feel like very obvious myths, then it's easy to fall into those. And so, yeah, I think for that reason, there is a lot of work to be done so that we don't misconstrue progress in some areas as absolving us of needing to address these larger things. But I also just feel like some of that is coming because the people steering the conversations benefit from us being more mad at each other than pushing them further. The furthest that the federal government has gotten on reparations is a bill to potentially study reparations, which has not passed Congress yet, still. So, like in 2024, the federal government has not even committed to studying reparations. There are no task forces, there are no formal reports. There's statewide things that are happening in New York and California and other places in North Carolina, but there's no federal investment in this conversation. And that's because our Congress is predominantly white and male and older. And so, yeah, they get up there and you have Ta-Nehisi Coates waxing poetic about why we need reparations, and still it doesn't pass. And it's just like, okay, at what point do we need to talk to someone new? And I firmly believe that we're like barking up the wrong tree by like waiting for white old men to give us anything as opposed to Black and Indigenous people coming together and making this shit ungovernable until it does. You know what I mean? And I think that happens when the misconceptions are like faded away, even between us, because there's always going to be someone who wants to get it wrong. There's always going to be a Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, Candace Owens who wants to get it wrong and has a large microphone and a Spotify podcast to do it. But like if we are louder than them, if we are using our digital spaces, our publishing spaces, our TV, film, documentary, music spaces to tell a different story, it's like they have to catch on. And that's what I do see already starting. I mean, you go from Black Panther, in the first Black Panther, Killmonger is in a museum talking about none of this stuff is yours. And now you have Caribbean and African nations demanding artifacts back and getting them back. You have these portrayals of Black and Indigenous solidarity, even in like Black Panther 2 or in Underground or in so many other projects. And I think it shows because then people are like curious about that. So I think we just have to breathe life into the areas that will sustain our movements and not expect to like only ever be demystifying what white men want to get wrong. Like they're trolling. And so if we're only ever talking to them and never to our people, then we're like literally wasting our breath.
That's great. And Brea, you're already touching on it a little bit, but I definitely wanted to get into both of y'all's storytelling work and would love to hear just how you see your storytelling work, or even just like the gaps in current storytelling that could shape a future for land justice and land back and reparations.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm definitely in this next phase of my life. I am a lot more interested in talking to Black and Indigenous and people of color about reparations and land back, because I do feel as though when we don't stand in its way, we can bring a tidal wave. And I think that sometimes I'll hear, even, like a Black person, well intentioned, I don't want their handout. I don't need their handout. I'm like, stop feeding into their hand. It's not a handout. Like, you can say I'm ambitious without like turning your nose up at a systemic response to systemic injustice. And I just think that whether you think you're going to benefit from it or not, whether you think that you have done good without it, like in the same way that for all the talk that we had about affirmative action, and now we live in a world without it. So like we're seeing so many progressive policies being pulled back and snatched from us, and we have to get better about the narrative that we use to speak about them, whether that be like Allie, you were talking about earlier, like critical race theory, and not letting the dog whistle language be a tool that they use to control our narratives. So yeah, that's a long way of me saying that I'm interested in arming people of color, and especially Black and Indigenous people, with the information that they need to go up against, that white lashing that is coming, that is here. And I think that that's a better use of my time than dealing with the trolls or the people who are just not interested in getting it. Yeah, that's where I'm at. And making it culturally relevant, because even when I wrote Rooted, I knew that not everyone, it's not a book for everyone. Some people listen to audiobooks and read books, but some people want the short form content, and we do live in that society. And so it's like, how can we make it in multiple forms so that no one can say this message didn't reach them?
Yes. I just believe in storytelling. I think it's a very powerful tool if used right. And I believe in it because, we can stand up and preach this and that, but I think, where we can move the needle a little bit is when we're touching, really the hearts of people. Um, and I think through storytelling that can happen, through filmmaking. You watch an incredible film and you get to know a character, and you root for that character, and I think it creates this empathy and compassion, and sometimes without even knowing it. And I think that's why a lot of my work is rooted in storytelling. And I'm excited because through Protect the Sacred, I'm working to build out a new program called Connecting the Rainbow, which is creating an intergenerational space for Native youth and Native elders, so that Native youth can reconnect to those creation stories and the ancestral knowledge that they haven't really been connected to. And then so creating that space, but then also thinking about how can they creatively preserve that knowledge, and helping them to think creatively about how to do that, and then also providing the tools and resources to do so once they reconnect with that ancestral knowledge, then do they want to create a podcast to talk about it? Do they want to write op-eds and submit them to be published, short films or documentaries? And I'm really excited about that. And I think many of those stories will contribute to what is known as climate storytelling now, because, as I mentioned, many of our values, traditions, creation stories that exist in Native American communities are rooted in our relationship to Mother Earth. And so I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited about, um, uh, you know, conveying and delivering these messages and these stories, through a format that I think could really touch the hearts of many people, and therefore change their mind on different topics.
This has been such great information. I'd love to hear from both of you. For people that are listening to this episode, what can they do to support the work that needs to happen that both of you have helped us to understand more deeply?
Well, I can kick it off. I would definitely tell people to support organizations like Where Is My Land, which is led by Kavan Ward. They are leading the research and advocacy for eminent domain reversals, which is a really direct and local way that people can get invested in Black families getting their land back. And again, you don't need a president or a Congress to sign off on this. A lot of times their campaigns only need city councils to vote, a county executive to vote in their favor. And that's a lot lower stakes, so to speak, but it means the world for the families who have had that taken within the last century, who can trace it and who only needed someone to take a chance. So I definitely would suggest that people support Where Is My Land? And just in general, if you're digging deeper and wanting to learn more, of course, again, there is my book, Rooted, on the American Legacy of Land Theft and the Modern Movement for Black Land Ownership.
I would encourage people to follow organizations like NDN Collective, who I think is they're definitely leading the land back movement. And there's Native Organizers Alliance, there's Illuminative, there's quite a few pretty well known Native organizations that are doing incredible work around land justice, land back. There's us Protect the Sacred. We're on all social platforms, and yeah, and I would just encourage there's incredible. I feel like the Native American community has had a really several successful years of Native storytelling, and I would just recommend checking out even shows like Reservation Dogs, where they do touch on topics like land back, Rutherford Falls and Dark Winds, and really, if you're one of those people that have only seen us in the Hollywood westerns, there's more recent content available, and I encourage you to dive into that.
Great. Thank you both so much. It was such a joy to be with both of you and to hear more about your work and how you come to this work. Thank you so much for your time.